Hey everyone, Tony here with RCHelp.com, and if you've been following along, you know that we started out rebuilding the shocks. I showed you how to rebuild them, and then I went through and rebuilt all 8 shocks. They are just absolutely perfect. Then we went through and tore this entire truck apart. Showed you how to rebuild the differentials, and they're about as smooth as you could ask for. Then we got in to the transmission. Now the transmission did not need to be rebuilt, so I didn't touch it. There's way too many gears, way too much stuff that can go wrong in here. I just made sure it was clean, no teeth were missing on any of the gears, and everything was spinning free. I lubed all the bearings. Then I showed you how to redo the brakes to get a little bit more life out of them by flipping the pads over and sanding the actual disc. And I showed you a little bit on the slipper clutch. The slipper clutch we're going to get a little bit more into a little bit later on in another video. We also rebuilt this engine. This was actually one of the second video of this truck. This engine is almost like brand new again. The carburetor did come loose, but we still got to take that apart because I kind of cheated and never cleaned it. So we still got to take the carburetor apart. But this is what I've been waiting for. We're going to put this back together, guys. We got to clean this chassis back here. We got to clean all these A-arms. We got to clean the braces. We got to clean everything and get it in a somewhat presentable fashion. As I've said in almost every video, get an air compressor. I'm going to use an air compressor to clean 90% of this stuff. I may have to put some of it in the solvent tank, may have to hit some of it with a brake cleaner and a toothbrush. You just never know. But I'm going to clean up all this stuff, and then we're going to throw this thing back together. Now that we got the majority of the parts clean, and I spent the better part of an hour with WD-40, red rags, solvent tank, air blower, you name it, to clean this thing. And the result, I think, pays off. As you can see, we're starting out with a bare chassis. Man, how much better does that look? The first thing we're going to get put on here is the transmission. The reverse of before, remember, these big servo holes are the front. The spur gear goes in the back. Remember that. Slide that in there, turn it upside down, grab one of your brackets, screw it on, do that for both sides, and the transmission will be in there. Now one thing to note when you're putting on these brackets underneath, the longer side goes towards the rear, the short side goes towards the front. I almost screwed that up. Now it's time to install the differentials. Don't forget, put your rear drive shaft on, and don't forget to hook up your drive shafts before you bolt these to the chassis, otherwise you won't be able to get them on. I am going to do exactly that, and then I'll be back. Now that we've got the front and rear differentials on, we need to get the steering knuckle put on. Now remember which way this come off, because it's only going to go on one way. Now before we can tighten down these 2 screws up here, we're going to have to get the skid plate on down here because these are notched. So we got to line those up in the skid plate, then we can tighten everything down. Remove any screws that you may have put in there so you knew exactly where they go. And now it's the fun time of trying to get everything to line up. Once you got that, put your screws in, tighten them down top and bottom. You may have to use 2 screwdrivers so that you don't twist out that plastic. Now when you put this together, don't forget your metal plate like I just did. Now remember, the longer screws are going to go into these 4 right here that's going into these brackets where the differential goes. The shortest screws go into your steering, and then the medium screws go back here into these long braces underneath the chassis. Same thing for the rear, just minus the steering braces. Now we're starting to get somewhere. Got the skid plates on, differential, transmission. Now it's almost starting to look like a truck again. Now we're ready to throw on the A-arms. Now if you're worried about where they go, because I've got them all back in a pile over here, look at your tie rods. This one, when it's sitting like this, that tie rod is going to be horizontal, and it's only going to mount up to these screws in here on this steering linkage. Now this one here is going to be going vertical. I know it's going to go to the rear. Everything lines up. Before we can get to that, we need to put on all of our axles onto the differential, then we'll slide these on. Same way as taking them apart, little grub screw, don't lose them. Now she's starting to look like a truck. Got the steering hooked up, all the suspension arms. They're not as free as I'd like them to be, but I'm telling you, they are so much better than the way they were. Now what we need to do is we need to get some electronics put back in this thing. I'm going to mount my servo brackets and get all my servos put in here, get my receiver pack put in, get my receiver put in, and then I'll be back. Alright, well, as you can see, got all the servos on. Now we're ready to put the receiver in and kind of clean up these wires. If you remember last time, but whenever we took this thing apart, these wires were friggin' everywhere. Drove me insane. And there's only 4 wires on this entire thing. You got the battery wire, then your 3 servo wires, that's it. On a 6-channel helicopter, a CCPM or collective pitch helicopter, yeah, you got 4 servos plus a gyro plus an ESC plus anything else you got running around there. 3 servos is not going to be hard. So I want to basically clean all these up, put the receiver in, and then put the receiver pack in, run that wire, clean all that up as well. Now that we've got all the servos in, the wiring is much neater. I did have to cram it pretty good into that box though. Let's go ahead and get the engine put on here. I do have to pull the carburetor off of it, so I'm going to do that, clean it up. Cleaning up a carburetor is real simple. I may get into it in depth a little bit later on the Stampede because it does need work. And I'm going to seal the exhaust. The exhaust tubing that I bought did not work, so I had to go back to that piece of ripped crap. And it's not working out so well. But, you know, that's just kind of the way things go whenever you try to fix other people's mistakes. So I'm going to get the engine kind of cleaned up a little bit and get it in the chassis, set the gear mesh, and then we'll move on to the fuel tank. As you can see, I've got the engine in here. I put on the new air filter, old air filter base, but a new element inside. I'm telling you, these right here, that is a bad idea to put into an air filter. You know, there's dirt coming all the way down the side of it. I can tell dirty air has been passing by that filter and straight into the carburetor. When you're running these in dirt and real sandy conditions, dust, it will tear up a motor in a heartbeat. What we need to do now is we need to get the fuel tank on, and before we do the fuel tank, we're going to go ahead and empty that out. The best way I've found to empty it out is get your fuel jug, find you a corner that you can get your nozzle down into, squeeze that bottle, get out some air, open the lid, stick that in there, and then start sucking that fuel out. Now if you got a bunch of trash in your fuel tank, don't do that. But my fuel tank was clean, I checked it, I know, I'm good to go. Now that we got that out, what we can do is we can remove this fuel line. Now the fuel tank's on, and you'll notice I've already got my fuel line hooked up to it. And the reason I did that is you can't hardly get to that little nipple down there. Now what we need to do is, the way it was run was I would just cut it just like that. Well, I ain't gonna do that. Now we are going to put a coil back here, just enough about like that. What that's going to do is it's going to give you more fuel for that carburetor to suck in while it's upside down and not picking up from the bottom of the tank. We'll use a small zip tie it down here, and guys, it's much better. I don't know why they don't do this in the factory other than to save money on silicone, which you'd figure all the movie stars would have all it taken up. Cut the line right there and put her on. Now, a couple zip ties and she'll be good to go. For the pressure line, we're going to do pretty much the same thing. Feed your pressure line into your exhaust. Now, instead of actually coiling it, I think I'm going to run it down over here underneath the fuel tank and then come up along the side. And then we can tuck all that back in there like that. What that's going to do is it's going to stop all the pulsing that you're going to get, which can cause an erratic idle, erratic top end. It can cause a lot of bad stuff that you don't want to happen to your vehicle. Now I have a total of 3 feet of fuel tubing on this truck. From that to 3 feet. That's probably about a foot. Yeah, I can guarantee I can flip over and this thing will sit there and idle for about 30 seconds before it would die. I love it. I'm going to zip tie this up, then I'll be back. Now that all the fuel tubing is secured back here and it'll be behind the shock tower, now we need to get the shock towers, put the shocks on the front and the back, just like we had to take them off because that fuel tank's in the way. Yes, we could have put them on earlier, but it's easier this way. Trust me, guys. Put the shocks on there, put them in the middle hole on top, bottom, front, back. Middle hole perfect. That's where it needs to run. We'll get into setting these up and tuning them and what standing them up does, what laying them down does. We'll get into all that. Just trust me. Install the shocks on your shock tower, install the shock tower on the truck, and I'll be back. Oh man, I can smell the nitro burning now. It's getting so close. Excellent. Got all of the shocks and A-arms on. Got the shock towers on. Everything is pretty much on except bumpers and tires. Guys, speaking of bumpers, if you don't want to run bumpers, fine. Don't run bumpers. This little bracket though has to go between the two plates that hold the differential. If it doesn't, it can separate, causing it to be able to move, and it just ends in no good manner whatsoever, no matter how you look at it. At least use this if you're not going to run a bumper. I am going to install the bumper now. Could you have guessed? And then I'll be back. Excellent. Bumpers are on, suspension's on, motors and everything's in. All we got to do, stick the tires on. Yes, I washed them, and can't really tell, but I did. But put the tires on, then we'll get the radio and we'll get all the linkages set up because we did take everything off, so we're going to have to reset them up. So get the tires on. It's almost fun time, guys. Tires are on, man. Now, since we went from a 30 weight oil to a 40 weight that I know is correct, being low-C, now, if you remember whenever I first dropped this truck in the very first video, it bottomed out. And it shouldn't have. Now, no bottoming out. The back end is still just a little weak. It's wanting to drop more than the front, but that's to be expected with the engine. I have a way to fix that. And no, it is not putting spacers in it and making this truck look like this. No, No, this truck needs to be level. Everything needs to be level whenever you will get ready to run this. See how slow that thing comes up? That's what the extra weight oil is going to do. Not only does it stop it from that, but it comes up a little bit slower as well, and it doesn't jar it back up whenever land from a jump. So let's get the radio and let's get everything set up on this. Always turn your radio on first. Turn the switch on. Alright, it needs to pull just a little bit more on the throttle to get full wide open. Not too awful much though. It's not quite closing the carburetor all the way, so this one needs to come forward, this one needs to go back, and then we need to relieve some pressure off of this one. Not a big deal. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to adjust this one out here since it's got a little bit more space. I don't like running drag brakes. Some people like the drag brake. I personally don't. That's still just a little bit too tight. I like to leave just a little bit of play in that linkage right there. So now you still get great braking power. Now all we got to do is adjust it so that we know the carburetor is going to shut every single time. That's to take this one, undo it, and slide it forward just a hair. Now we need to grab a hold of this one. We got to slide it back. That way the carburetor can close all the way. Alright, carb's closed right there. Tighten it down. Now I can see that the angle of this rod is actually coming up just a little bit, so it needs a little bit more of a bend right there. So grab my pair of pliers, put a little bit more bend in it. Now it's starting to slide a little bit better, but she needs some lube. Put a couple little drops of bearing oil in there. That is much better. Still not quite hitting full throttle though. But you know what? That's okay. Check the steering. I actually got the steering reversed now, which tells me I put the servo on backwards. Alright, we're ready to fire this thing up, guys. Grab some go-go juice, pop her open, fill her up. Now if you're one that likes to use this primer, it's going to take a while to get this fuel up in there. I did fix my one-way bearing issue. I went ahead and took it out and hit everything with some brake cleaner and took some emery and kind of scored that shaft a little bit, and it grabs a little bit better. It still releases perfect, so I know everything's great. Let's hook up the starter motor and we'll see if we can't get her to fire. Yep, gotta charge the battery and I will be right back. Alright, we're back. Got the battery charged back here. My starter died. Everything's still exactly the same. Most excellent. Let's give her a shot.